3 years of love. And this is how it ended. In the rain.
The rain was pouring down, soaking Lyra to the bone as she stood on the sidewalk. Beside her, a pile of her clothes and books lay in the mud. Barrett stood in the doorway of the house she had paid for, his arm wrapped around Portia Glaze. Portia was wearing a diamond necklace that cost more than Lyra's entire flower shop.
You're nothing, Lyra. Just a burden.
Find a shelter, honey!
For 3 years, she hid the truth.
Get lost, Lyra, Barrett sneered, tossing her last suitcase into a puddle. Portia has real status. You're just a penniless burden who dragged me down for 3 years. I'm finally moving up in the world. Portia giggled, leaning her head on Barrett's shoulder. It's a shame, really. But a man like Barrett needs a queen, not a servant. Go find a shelter, honey. Lyra's heart felt like it was breaking, but she refused to cry in front of them. For 3 years, she had hidden her identity as a Sterling heir, wanting to see if Barrett loved her for her soul. Now she had her answer. Suddenly, the sound of heavy engines filled the quiet street. 3 massive, black SUVs pulled up to the curb. A man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped out, holding a large umbrella. It was Nathan Sterling, Lyra's older brother and the head of the Sterling Empire. That's enough, Lyra, Nathan said, his voice deep and commanding.
I told you this would happen! Come home!
No,
No.
I'm starting over.
I told you this would happen. These people are beneath you. Come home to the estate. I've already bought you a penthouse in Manhattan to make up for this mess. Barrett and Portia froze. Their eyes went wide as they looked at the luxury cars and the men in black suits. Barrett's mouth hung open. Sterling. As in, the Sterling Bank family. Lyra looked at her brother, then back at the men who had just betrayed her. If she went with Nathan now, she would lose her independence forever. She would be back under her family's control, living a life of scheduled meetings and arranged dates. No, Nathan, Lyra said firmly. I'm not coming back. I'm going to prove that I can find real love without the Sterling name. Nathan sighed. With who? You have nothing left. Lyra looked around desperately. A few feet away, under a street lamp, a man was leaning over the open hood of an old, beat-up truck. He was covered in grease, wearing a torn gray shirt and heavy work boots. He looked like a simple mechanic who had been working all night. Lyra walked through the rain and stood beside him. The man looked up, his dark eyes sharp and mysterious under the flickering light. This was Killian Drake, though to Lyra, he was just a stranger in a dirty shirt. Hey, Lyra said, her voice steady.
Do you want to get married? Right now?
Sure.
Night. Lyra walked through the rain and stood beside him. The man looked up, his dark eyes sharp and mysterious under the flickering light. This was Killian Drake, though to Lyra, he was just a stranger in a dirty shirt. Hey, Lyra said, her voice steady. Do you want to get married? Right now. Killian wiped a smudge of oil from his cheek, looking at the billionaire brother in the SUVs and then at the girl standing in the rain. A strange, knowing look passed over his face. Sure, Killian replied, his voice a low rumble. I could use a change of pace. Lyra turned back to her brother and her shocked ex-husband. She grabbed Killian's rough, grease-stained hand. Meet my new husband, she announced. And I didn't need a single cent of Sterling money to find him. Nathan Sterling stared at his sister as if she had lost her mind. The rain continued to drum against the roof of his expensive car, but Lyra didn't move. She stood firmly next to the man in the greasy shirt. Killian Drake didn't look like a savior, he looked like someone who had spent his whole life under the hood of a car. You're serious? Nathan asked, his voice cold. You're going to marry a mechanic you just met to prove a point? Lyra, look at him. He probably doesn't have $10 to his name. Lyra squeezed Killian's hand. His skin was rough and warm, a sharp contrast to the cold rain. He has more honor in his pinky finger than Barrett has in his whole body, she snapped. And I don't need your money, Nathan. I'm starting over. Nathan shook his head, stepped back into his SUV, and signaled the driver. The heavy vehicle splashed through the puddles, leaving Lyra and Killian alone in the dark. Behind them, Barrett and Portia were still standing in the doorway, laughing quietly. They didn't think Lyra would last a week in the real world. Killian turned to Lyra. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at her with a calm, steady gaze. If we're doing this, we do it right, he said. I have a small apartment downtown. It's not a palace, but it's a roof. But I have one rule, no handouts. We live on what we earn. Lyra nodded quickly. That's exactly what I want. They drove to a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in a noisy part of the city. The walls were thin, and the furniture was old, but it was far away from the Sterling estate. To make things official, they sat at a small wooden table and wrote out a simple agreement on a piece of notebook paper. They called it their poverty contract.
Two billionaires, pretending to be broke.
This shop is gone next week.
It stated they would share all costs and live a simple life, relying only on their hard work. As Lyra signed the paper, she felt a heavy weight in her pocket. It was her black titanium credit card, a symbol of the billions she was leaving behind. When Killian wasn't looking, she slipped the card inside the lining of an old, dusty sneaker at the bottom of her bag. She couldn't get rid of it yet, but she promised herself she wouldn't use it. Across the table, Killian felt the weight of his own secret. Under the long sleeve of his work shirt was a watch made of solid platinum and rare jewels, worth over $100,000. He carefully pulled his cuff down, making sure the metal didn't catch the light. He was the head of Drake Industries, a man who could buy this entire neighborhood, but tonight, he was just a man trying to see if someone could love him without his crown. "Welcome home, Lyra," he said softly. They stood in the small kitchen, two billionaires pretending to be broke, both searching for something money could never buy. Outside, the city lights flickered, and for the first time in years, Lyra felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The morning sun hit the dusty windows of Lyra's flower shop, but the light didn't bring any warmth. Lyra was busy trimming the stems of some fresh lilies when the bell over the door let out a sharp ring. She looked up, hoping for a friendly customer, but her heart sank. Portia Glaze stepped inside, clicking her high heels against the wooden floor. She was holding a stack of legal papers and wearing a smirk that was sharper than Lyra's scissors. "I told you that you wouldn't last, Lyra," Portia said, tossing a thick folder onto the counter. "This little shop is an eyesore. I've already spoken to the landlord. I'm buying this entire block, and the first thing I'm going to do is tear this place down to build a parking lot for my new office." Lyra felt a cold chill run through her. This shop was the only thing she had left that truly belonged to her. "You can't do that, Portia. I have a lease." "Leases can be broken when you have enough money," Portia laughed. "By next week, your flowers will be under a layer of concrete. Why don't you go back to your grease monkey husband and tell him you're unemployed? It's where you belong."
Shut our building down.
Power.
Doesn't always make noise.
When Killian stopped by the shop for lunch, he found Lyra sitting on a wooden stool, her eyes red from holding back tears. She told him everything. She expected him to be angry or scared, but instead, his face became very still. His eyes turned dark, looking less like a mechanic and more like a hunter. "Go home and rest, Lyra," Killian said softly, placing a large, steady hand on her shoulder. "I have a few friends in the city government. I'll see if I can talk to someone." As soon as Lyra left, Killian walked into the back room and pulled a second phone from a hidden pocket in his tool bag. It was a sleek, encrypted device that he never used around his wife. He dialed a number he knew by heart. "This is Killian Drake," he said, his voice dropping into a cold, commanding tone that would have terrified Barrett. "The glazed tower on 5th Street. I want it gone. Find a reason to shut it down. Now." On the other end of the line, his top lawyer didn't ask questions. They knew that when Killian Drake made a two-faced call, things happened fast.
Mr. Drake doesn't like interference.
The next morning, Portia arrived at her own massive office building, ready to sign the papers to destroy Lyra's shop. But she was stopped at the front door by a line of city inspectors. Huge yellow signs were being pasted over the glass entrance. "What is the meaning of this?" Portia screamed at the lead inspector. "New orders, Miss Glaze," the man replied, not even looking up from his clipboard. An old record was found. This building sits on a site of extreme historical importance. The city has declared it a protected historic site, effective immediately. No business can be done here, and all your bank accounts connected to this property are frozen until the investigation is finished. You aren't moving a single brick. Portia stood on the sidewalk, her mouth hanging open in shock. Her empire was frozen, and she had no idea that the poor mechanic she had mocked was the one who had pulled the plug. That evening, Killian told Lyra he wanted to take her out to celebrate her shop being saved. He led her down a narrow alley to a small, hole-in-the-wall bistro called the Rusty Spoon.
I am Killian Drake.
She is Lyra Sterling.
Her down a narrow alley to a small, hole-in-the-wall bistro called the Rusty Spoon. The paint was peeling off the door, and the neon sign flickered weakly. To anyone passing by, it looked like the cheapest place in the city, but Lyra didn't care. She loved the quiet, cozy feeling of the small wooden tables. "It's perfect, Killian," Lyra said, squeezing his hand. She felt a little guilty knowing her secret credit card could buy 1,000 dinners here, but seeing Killian smile in his simple flannel shirt made her feel truly happy. What Lyra didn't know was that Killian had spent his lunch break on a very different kind of phone call. He hadn't just picked this place, he had bought it. An hour before they arrived, his lawyers had handed a check to the old owner that was large enough to let the men retire in luxury. Now, the entire staff was working for Killian Drake, though they were strictly ordered to keep acting like it was a regular, run-down diner. They were halfway through their meal when the front door swung open with a loud bang. Barrett and Portia marched in, looking completely out of place in their designer silk and gold jewelry. Portia was still fuming about her office building being frozen, and she was looking for someone to bully. "Oh, look at this," Portia sneered, waving a hand at the cracked ceiling. "I knew you two were poor, but I didn't think you were eating in a dumpster. Is this all a grease monkey can afford for his little florist?" Barrett laughed, pulling out a chair at the table right next to them. "The smell of cheap grease really suits you, Lyra. It's a big step down from the life I gave you." Killian didn't even look up from his plate. He just raised a hand and signaled the waiter, a young man who was hiding a very nervous smile. "Our neighbors look hungry," Killian said, his voice calm but dangerously sharp. "Bring them the special manager's platter." "On the house." The waiter nodded quickly and disappeared. A few minutes later, he returned with a tray of appetizers that looked dull, gray, and smelled slightly like old socks. Portia and Barrett, thinking they were getting a free meal to brag about, began to eat greedily. "Finally, some service," Barrett muttered, taking a big bite of a soggy mushroom. His face immediately turned a strange shade of green. Portia spit out a piece of shrimp, her eyes watering.
Bring them the special!
$10 million.
All funds transferred to Sterling Foundation.
"This is disgusting. This food is expired. Waiter. I want to speak to the owner right now." The waiter leaned in close, his voice perfectly polite. "I'm sorry, Miss Glaze, but the owner specifically requested that you be served our most vintage ingredients. He also mentioned that if you don't like the service, you are welcome to leave. In fact, you're banned from every restaurant on this block starting tonight." Barrett and Portia scrambled out of their chairs, clutching their stomachs and rushing for the door. As they disappeared into the night, Lyra looked at Killian in surprise. "How did you know the waiter would do that?" Killian just took a sip of his water and winked. "I guess even small-town grease monkeys have a little influence sometimes." A few days later, the city held a grand silent auction to raise money for a local children's hospital. Even though Lyra was pretending to be broke, she still wanted to help. She wore a simple, clean dress she had owned for years, while Killian wore a dark suit that looked a bit worn at the elbows. Together, they walked through the hall, looking at the shiny gold statues and expensive jewelry on display. In the center of the room was a small, dusty painting of a bowl of fruit. It wasn't very pretty, and most of the rich guests walked right past it without a second look. Lyra knew this painting well. It belonged to the Sterling Foundation, her family's massive charity. The money from this specific item went straight into the hospital's fund. "I want to help the kids," Lyra whispered to Killian. She picked up a pen and wrote a bid for $500 on the sheet next to the painting. It was a lot of money for a poor florist, but she knew she could spare it from her savings. Suddenly, a loud, sharp laugh echoed behind them. Portia Glaze stepped forward, looking like she was dressed in a mountain of silk and gold. Barrett was right behind her, looking smug. Portia looked at Lyra's bid and curled her lip in disgust. $500. How cute, Portia mocked. You really are trying to play a big game with pocket change, Lyra. I'm still mad about my office building, and seeing your face makes me want to win something just to watch you lose. Portia snatched the pen from the table. She wanted to humiliate Lyra in front of everyone. She didn't even look at the painting, she only cared about taking it away from Lyra. She scribbled a number on the paper that made the people nearby gasp. $10 million, Portia announced loudly, her voice ringing through the hall. Barrett cheered, looking at Killian with a mean grin. That's what real power looks like, grease monkey. My wife just spent more on a bowl of fruit than you'll make in 10 lifetimes. Lyra acted like she was shocked and upset. She pulled on Killian's arm as if she were trying to hide. Portia, please, that's way too much. You don't even like that painting. That's the point, honey, Portia said, signing the final payment paper with a flourish. I have so much money I can throw it away just to ruin your day. The auctioneer stepped up and banged his gavel. Sold. To Miss Portia Glaze for $10 million. As Portia stood there looking proud, a man in a tuxedo walked over and handed her a formal receipt. Thank you for your extreme generosity, Miss Glaze, he said politely. The Sterling Foundation is very happy. Since our family foundation owned the painting, all $10 million of your cash has just been transferred into our accounts. We will use it to build a new wing for the hospital in the Sterling name. Portia's smile vanished. Her face turned a ghostly shade of white as she realized what she had done. She had just given her last bit of available cash to the very family she hated most. She looked at the dusty painting of the fruit, then at Lyra, who was now wearing a very small, knowing smile. Thanks for the donation, Portia, Lyra said softly. The kids will really appreciate your money. The small apartment was quiet that evening, but Lyra's mind was racing. As Killian walked past her to put his heavy tool bag near the door, a faint scent caught her attention. It wasn't the smell of old oil or cheap soap. It was a deep, rich scent of wood and spice, the expensive smell of oud. She knew that scent well because her brother Nathan wore a custom version of it that cost thousands of dollars a bottle. Lyra watched Killian closely. He was wearing his usual gray work shirt, but he moved with a calm confidence that didn't match a struggling mechanic. He never seemed worried about money, and he always seemed to know exactly how to handle the bullies in town. She began to wonder if her poor husband was hiding a secret just as big as her own. Killian, Lyra said, trying to sound casual. My brother Nathan called. His sports car broke down nearby, and he's acting like it's the end of the world. The local shop said they couldn't find the parts for a week. Do you think you could take a look? Killian paused, his back to her for a second. A Sterling car. Those are complicated, Lyra. They have custom engines. I know, she said, watching his reflection in the window. But if you can fix it, maybe Nathan will finally stop bothering us about being broke. Killian sighed and grabbed his wrench. All right. Let's go. They met Nathan on a quiet side road where his bright red Italian supercar sat motionless. Nathan was pacing back and forth, looking at his gold watch. This car is one of only 10 in the world, Lyra. A regular mechanic will just break it more. Killian didn't say a word. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing his strong arms, and leaned deep into the engine. Lyra held her breath. Most mechanics would need hours of manuals and special computers just to understand this machine. But Killian moved with professional speed. His fingers moved over the wires and metal parts like he had built the car himself. In less than 3 minutes, Killian stepped back and wiped a tiny drop of oil from his hand. "Try it now." Nathan got behind the wheel and turned the key. The engine roared to life with a perfect, powerful hum. Nathan looked stunned. "How did you do that?" Even the factory experts in Europe take an hour just to run the tests on this model. Killian just shrugged and pulled his sleeves back down, covering the spot where his platinum watch was hidden. "I guess I just have a feel for engines," he said simply. As they walked back to their old truck, Lyra looked at Killian's hands. They were steady and strong. She knew now that he wasn't just a man who fixed cars for a living. He was someone who understood the world of the ultra-rich perfectly. She smiled to herself, realizing that in their house of secrets, she wasn't the only one wearing a mask. The luxury car Nathan had been driving was still humming perfectly after Killian's quick fix, but the peace did not last long. The very next afternoon, a familiar black SUV pulled up in front of Lyra and Killian's small apartment building. Lyra looked out the window and saw Portia glaze leaning against the car door, whispering into Nathan's ear with a wicked smile on her face. Portia had been busy. After losing $10 million to the Sterling Foundation, she was desperate for revenge. She had called Nathan and told him a pack of lies. She told him that Lyra wasn't just living with a poor man, but that Killian was a dangerous criminal who was tricking Lyra to get to her family's secrets. Nathan marched up the stairs and slammed his fist against the apartment door. When Killian opened it, he was still wearing his grease-stained work shirt, but his eyes were as cold as ice. "Get out of the way," Nathan barked, trying to push past Killian into the small living room. "Lyra, pack your things. I just heard the truth. This man is a low-life criminal. Portia told me everything about his shady past. You aren't safe here for one more minute." Lyra stepped forward, her face turning red with anger. "Nathan, stop it. Portia is lying. Killian is a good man. He's a mechanic living in a dump, Lyra." Nathan shouted. "He's using you." Killian didn't move an inch. He stood in the doorway like a stone wall, his shadow falling over Nathan. Even though he was dressed in rags, the way he stood made Nathan look small and weak. Killian didn't raise his voice, but when he spoke, the air in the room seemed to freeze. "Mr. Sterling," Killian said, his voice low and smooth. "You are a guest in my home. In this house, we don't shout, and we certainly don't listen to the gossip of women who throw away $10 million because they are petty. If you want to talk to your sister, you will do it with respect, or you will leave." Nathan froze. He was used to everyone bowing down to him because of his last name. But as he looked into Killian's eyes, he felt a strange sense of fear. He felt like he was standing in front of someone much more powerful than a king. He couldn't understand how a nobody could have such a commanding presence. "Who do you think you're talking to?" Nathan stammered, trying to find his courage. "I'm talking to a man who is lucky his sister is kind enough to still call him her brother," Killian replied. He stepped forward just an inch, and Nathan instinctively took a step back into the hallway. "Lyra is staying here because she chose to. Now, if you're done making a scene, the door is right there." Portia watched from the stairs, her jaw dropping. She expected Nathan to have Killian arrested, but instead, the great Nathan Sterling looked confused and defeated. Without saying another word, Nathan turned and walked away, his face pale. Killian closed the door and turned back to Lyra. The scary, powerful look vanished, and he was just her husband again. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Lyra nodded, but she couldn't stop thinking about what she had just seen. A simple mechanic had just looked at the head of the Sterling family and made him blink first. She realized that Killian's secret wasn't just about money, he was a lion pretending to be a house cat. The night was quiet as Barrett crept through the shadows of the parking lot. He was holding a heavy metal tool and a look of pure hatred on his face. He was tired of losing to a man who smelled like old tires and engine oil. If Killian can't drive his precious truck to work, he can't pay the rent, Barrett whispered to himself. Let's see how much Lyra loves him when they are sleeping on the street. He reached the old truck and knelt down, ready to cut the brake lines. He wanted to cause a small accident that would ruin Killian's life. But before his tool could even touch the metal, the world suddenly exploded with light. Four large men in dark suits stepped out from behind the nearby cars. They didn't look like local police, they looked like professional soldiers. Their movements were fast and silent. Before Barrett could even scream, one man grabbed his arm and twisted the tool out of his hand, while another pinned him against the brick wall. Mr. Drake does not like people touching his property, one of the men said. His voice was cold and sounded like it belonged to someone who guarded kings. Lyra had been watching from the apartment window, worried because Killian was late coming up from the garage. She ran down the stairs, her heart pounding. She expected to see a fight, but instead, she saw a group of elite security guards holding a shaking Barrett. Killian walked out from the shadows, his face as calm as ever. He wasn't wearing his greasy shirt anymore, he had a clean black jacket on, and he looked incredibly powerful. He didn't look surprised to see the guards at all. In fact, they all bowed their heads slightly when he approached. Is there a problem, Barrett? Killian asked. Barrett was trembling, his teeth chattering. Who are these people, Killian? You're just a mechanic. Why do you have a private army? Killian didn't answer him. He just looked at the lead guard. Take him to the edge of town. If he ever comes near my wife or this building again, make sure he regrets it. The men dragged a crying Barrett away into the darkness. Lyra stood there, looking at her husband. She realized that the friends in government and the luck he always talked about weren't accidents. Killian had been watching over her every second. He had a whole team of people protecting their small, poor life from the shadows. Killian, Lyra whispered, her eyes wide. You've been doing this for weeks, haven't you? The frozen office, the restaurant, the auction, it wasn't just luck. Killian walked over and took her hand. His grip was firm and protective. I told you I would keep you safe, Lyra. I don't care if I have to hide who I am to do it. You wanted to see if someone could love you for your soul, and I wanted to make sure no one ever hurt that soul again. Lyra looked at the empty parking lot, then back at the men she had married on a whim. She felt safer than she ever had in the Sterling mansion. She knew now that her husband was a giant hiding in a small room, and his greatest secret was just about to be revealed. The grand ballroom was filled with the smell of expensive perfume and the sound of a live orchestra. It was the year-end gala, the biggest event in the city, where the richest families gathered to show off their power. Lyra walked through the gold-trimmed doors wearing a simple, dark blue dress. It didn't have any labels or bright jewels, but it fit her perfectly. Beside her, Killian walked with his usual calm pace, his hands tucked into the pockets of a plain black jacket. Portia Glaze was standing in the center of the room, surrounded by a group of laughing socialites. Barrett stood next to her, holding a glass of bubbly water and looking around like he owned the building. When Portia spotted Lyra, her face twisted into a look of pure joy. She had been waiting for this moment to finally crush her rival in public. Stop right there. Portia shouted, pointing a finger at Lyra. The music seemed to fade as people turned to look. How did a penniless florist and a grease monkey get past the guards? This is a high-class event, not a soup kitchen. Barrett stepped forward, looking at Lyra's dress with a sneer. That dress is a cheap fake, Lyra. I know the designer who made the real version of that gown, and it costs $50,000. You're wearing a knockoff. Guards. Kick these frauds out before they steal the silverware. Two security guards started to move toward them, but Killian didn't flinch. He slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, gold-rimmed card. He handed it to the head of security, who turned pale the moment he read the name. Wait, the guard whispered, stepping back and bowing low. Killian reached up and unzipped his plain jacket, letting it fall to the floor. Underneath, he was wearing a custom-tailored suit that caught the light like polished silk. He stood taller, his eyes flashing with the cold authority of a king. "I believe there is a misunderstanding," Killian said, his voice echoing through the silent room. "I am Killian Drake, CEO of Drake Industries. And this gala is being held in my building." The room went completely silent. Portia's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. Barrett looked like he was about to faint. D. Drake. The billionaire. But the surprises weren't over. Lyra stepped forward and looked directly at Portia. "And as for the dress, Barrett, you're right. It is a one-of-a-kind piece. But it wasn't a fake. The designer made it specifically for the Sterling family." At that moment, Nathan Sterling walked through the crowd and stood beside Lyra. He didn't look angry or bossy anymore, he looked proud. "My sister doesn't need to steal anything," Nathan announced to the shocked crowd. "She is Lyra Sterling, the true heir to the Sterling Empire." Portia and Barrett backed away as the guests began to whisper and point. The poor couple they had been bullying all month were actually the two most powerful people in the room. Lyra took Killian's arm, feeling the strength of the men who had protected her secret while keeping his own. The masks were finally off, and for the first time, everyone saw them for who they truly were. The silence in the grand ballroom was broken only by the sound of Portia's heavy breathing. She looked at Killian Drake, then at Lyra Sterling, and finally at her own trembling hands. Within minutes, the news of their true identities flashed across every glowing screen in the city. By the time the gala ended, Barrett's phone was buzzing with alerts. Every investor had pulled their money, and every bank had closed his accounts. Portia's family name, once a symbol of pride, was now blacklisted from every high society club and business deal in Manhattan. They were no longer the bullies, they were outcasts with nothing left but the clothes on their backs. As the crowd moved away to give the powerful couple some space, Lyra and Killian walked out onto the wide marble balcony. The city lights twinkled below them like a field of fallen stars. The cool night air felt fresh and honest after so many weeks of hiding behind grease and old clothes. Lyra turned to Killian, a small smile playing on her lips. "So, Mr. CEO," she said softly. "You're an expert mechanic, a professional bodyguard, and a billionaire. Is there anything else I should know?" Killian laughed, a warm and real sound that made Lyra's heart skip a beat. "I could ask you the same thing, Ms. Heiress. You're a world-class florist and a member of the most powerful family in the country. I guess we both had the same idea. We both wanted to find someone who didn't care about the numbers in our bank accounts. I was so afraid you only liked me because I was a poor girl who needed saving," Lyra admitted, looking down at her blue dress. Killian stepped closer and took both of her hands in his. "And I was afraid you only liked the tough guy who could fix your car. But the truth is, I loved the woman who stood in the rain and chose a stranger over a pile of gold. I loved the woman who spent her last $500 to help sick children." Killian reached into the pocket of his expensive suit. This time, he didn't pull out a paper ring or a napkin. He opened a small velvet box, and even the bright moon seemed to dim compared to the light coming from inside. It was a diamond so rare and large that it could have bought every building on the block. It was a ring fit for a queen, but as he held it out, his eyes were full of the same simple kindness Lyra had seen in that small apartment. "Lyra Sterling," Killian said, dropping to one knee. "We've lived a lie for a long time, but my heart has always been telling the truth."
Will you marry me? For real?
Yes.
True wealth is who you are when no one is watching.
My heart has always been telling the truth. I don't want a fake marriage or a poverty contract anymore. I want a real life with you. Will you marry me for real this time?" Lyra felt tears of joy stinging her eyes. She didn't need the Sterling name, and she didn't need the Drake fortune. She just needed the men standing in front of her. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. 1,000 times, yes. As Killian slipped the ring onto her finger, the kingdom they had been searching for was finally found. It wasn't made of gold or skyscrapers, it was built on a love that was finally, perfectly true. Real-life lesson. The wealth of the invisible. In a generation where status is measured by follower counts, blue checkmarks, and the luxury brands shown in a 15-second clip, we often forget that the most valuable parts of our identity are the ones that don't fit in a camera frame. The trap of performance love. Barrett and Portia represent the validation trap. They only valued people based on what they could provide, money, connections, or a shiny image to show off. When we build our lives on these external things, our relationships become like Portia's historic building. They can be frozen or demolished the moment the external value disappears. The lesson: if you only love someone for their crown, you will leave them the moment they lose it. True character is what remains when the costume is taken off. The power of selective disclosure. Both Lyra and Killian practiced selective disclosure. They didn't lead with their bank accounts, they led with their actions. Lyra led with her kindness in the flower shop, and Killian led with his hard work under a greasy hood. They proved that competence, the ability to do the work, and character, how you treat people when you have nothing, are the only true forms of power. The paper ring test. In the story, the paper ring and the poverty contract served as a filter. They acted as a shield that kept the wrong people, like Barrett, out and let the right people in. Barrett failed the test because he couldn't see the queen inside the maid. Killian passed the test because he was looking for a partner, not a paycheck. Independence is the ultimate safety net. Lyra refused her brother's golden rescue because she knew that if she didn't learn to stand on her own, she would always be a prisoner to someone else's wealth. The greatest flex in the story wasn't the $500 million necklace, it was Lyra's ability to say no to a billionaire because she knew her own worth. The viral takeaway for the real world. We are currently living in a thumbnail culture where we try to make our lives look perfect so people will click on us. But the secret to a happy life is being a billionaire in hiding, not necessarily in money, but in spirit. Don't let your job title define your soul. Killian was a CEO, but he was proud to be a mechanic. Don't let your bank account define your kindness. Lyra was an heiress, but she was proud to be a florist. Remember, the most powerful person in the room is often the one who doesn't feel the need to prove they belong there. Final thought: build a life that you would still love even if the lights went off and the mask stayed on. Authenticity is the only currency that never devalues. Please subscribe, like, and share for more drama.